Like most people who were around in the 90s, I got my introduction to Babka through an episode of Seinfeld, when Jerry and Elaine were at a bakery that ran out of chocolate babka. Jerry was okay with this because they also offered cinnamon, but Elaine was disappointed, referring to the cinnamon as the lesser of the two babkas. So who's right in this scenario? And let's be really honest, it was Elaine, right? I mean, how are you going to compete with chocolate? If you put chocolate and cinnamon in the same babka, you're still going to refer to it as a chocolate babka. Because if chocolate is in the list of ingredients, it's going to be the star. It's not sitting backseat to anybody. And I find that very interesting, our fascination with chocolate, because I don't even know what it tastes like in its raw form. And by that I mean the seed of the Theobroma cacao tree. And what we have available to us at the grocery stores is so heavily processed and deeply roasted that it doesn't even resemble what it is like growing in the wild. And same thing goes with coffee beans as well. You think the coffee that you use to brew your cup every morning even resembles a raw coffee bean? Probably not. And I made that point in an earlier video when I stated that sometimes the process is more important than the base ingredient, and that couldn't be any more apparent than in the case of chocolate and coffee. So if you take something else like roasted barley and roast it to that same degree, you're going to evoke flavors of chocolate and coffee without using those base ingredients. Try a Russian Imperial Stout, for example, something like an old Rasputin. And it's so rich and full-bodied with that flavor of chocolate and coffee that it'll make an excellent pairing to anything that actually does contain those ingredients. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to make the superior babka, no lesser babkas today. I'm going to use chocolate and a little espresso, and I'm going to pair it with Old Rasputin Russian Imperial Stout on this episode of Bake and a Brew. To make the babka, we're going to start with 280 grams of flour, add 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of yeast, 1/4 cup of milk, 50 grams of sugar, and 2 eggs. Once that starts to come together, we're going to add 80 grams of butter, a little bit at a time, waiting till it all gets incorporated before adding more. And we'll continue to mix that for about 10 minutes until the gluten forms and the dough gets nice and stretchy. Then I'll knead it by hand to tighten up the outside a little bit. And I'll place that into a greased bowl. I'll cover that and let it rise for about 2 hours. While the dough is rising, I'll get started on my filling. I'll start out with 4 ounces of chocolate. I'm using 60% cacao. I'll add another 80 grams of butter and heat that until all the chocolate is melted and it becomes nice and smooth. Then I'll add 30 grams of confectioner sugar, 20 grams of cocoa powder, and 2 teaspoons of espresso powder. And once that's all mixed together, I'll put it aside to let it cool. And now that my dough is about double in size, I'll lightly flour my work surface and flour my rolling pin. I'll roll this into a large rectangle. I don't know the exact dimensions, but the bigger you get the rectangle, the more layers you'll have in your babka. So I like to get it as thin as I could comfortably handle. Then I'll gently spread on my filling. Try to get everything in an even layer, covering the whole thing except for just a little lip at the end. And I'll carefully roll this up. The dough is very soft, so I'm taking my time with it. And I'll pinch the seam to seal. Now this dough is so soft, I'm likely to make a huge mess out of it if I try to shape my babka now. I'm going to put this in plastic wrap and refrigerate it for about 20 minutes, just to firm everything up. And at this point you could just cut it as if you were going to make cinnamon buns, but for that traditional babka shape you want to take a sharp knife and cut it lengthwise. And with these 2 long pieces and the chocolate facing upwards, put it in an X pattern. And we'll start with one end and just twist them together. Do the same at the other end. Pinch the ends to seal. And you might have to squish it together a little bit to get it to fit in your loaf pan, which I already have greased and lined with parchment paper. And I'll cover that again and allow it to proof for about 2 hours. Now this is an enriched dough, so the yeast may be a little sluggish, so you don't want to rush this step. And after your babka is fully proofed, place it in a 325 degree oven for about 50 minutes. You're also going to want to have a piece of aluminum foil handy in case it starts to brown a little too quickly, which it does literally every time I make babka. This is after only about 30 minutes, so I'm going to take that foil and just tent it over top. While that's finishing up, we're going to make a simple syrup. And that just involves 100 grams of water plus 100 grams of granulated sugar. I actually meant to put cinnamon in the filling to appease the Jerrys of the world, but I forgot that, so let's add a little flavor to this simple syrup. We'll put a cinnamon stick in there and maybe a few cardamom pods, just to give it a little bit of that warm spice flavor. And we'll heat that up just until the sugar is dissolved. And our babka should be finishing up. We're looking for an internal temperature between 190 and 195. We'll get that out of the oven, and while it's still hot, we'll brush on our simple syrup to give it that nice glossy finish. And here it is, our finished babka. Buttery and rich dough, filled with beautiful chocolate swirls. We'll slice that up, and it's ready to pair with our beer. Let's try it with some North Coast Old Rasputin. Russian Imperial Stout was first developed when Catherine the Great was Empress of Russia. She was so fond of the English-style stouts that she wanted them to be served for her imperial court. But the trip between England and Russia was so far that the beer would spoil by the time it got there. So English brewers made the beer bigger in every possible way. They increased the alcohol content, gave it more hops, made it roastier. And they inevitably created a style that's one of the most sought after styles today. Old Rasputin was the first Russian Imperial Stout that I've ever had, and it had a lasting impact on me, creating a chain reaction trying to find bigger and bolder beers just because when I tasted it, it was unlike anything I've had before. But I always come back to this one because I think it really defines the American interpretation of the Russian Imperial Stout. It's a little drier than the English counterparts, a little more hops with some of that grapefruity citrus character in the aroma, but just a hint of it. The chocolatey, roasty character is still very much at the forefront. The babka came out great. There's a great balance between the sweetness of the dough and a little bit of that roasty bitterness from the chocolate and the espresso, and it really highlights those same characters in the beer. I love making babka at home, especially the chocolate babka, which is the superior babka, but some of the other lesser babkas as well. I've done blueberry jam with a little lemon zest, apple butter. I've done pumpkin and pumpkin spice in the fall. You could even do some savory babkas, maybe a basil pesto. Just that shape is so fun to do at home, and I think it comes out great every time. The other thing I think helps this pairing is the body of the beer. Russian Imperial Stout is so full-bodied, especially compared to other beers, even dark beers like other stouts. And I think because of the richness of the babka and that strong chocolate flavor, you kind of need something full-bodied to stand up to it. I think my individual taste really leans towards the highly roasted flavors. Like I love the dark roast coffee or the dark chocolate. And I think that's why I love Old Rasputin so much, because there's just so much roast character. And I think at a certain point, that roast flavor is almost transcendent. Like in the beer, I taste chocolate and coffee, even though the flavors of the raw cacao or the raw coffee beans, they're not used in there. It's just barley, but that process really brings out that flavor and makes the connection between beer and chocolate and espresso. Thank you for watching, and join me next time when I take another one of my favorite classic beers and try to find the perfect bake to pair it with.